I was 17 the night everything cracked open. Not because I yelled or slammed a door, but because I told the truth out loud. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the cheap overhead light buzzing, plates still warm from dinner. My stepfather asked why the electric bill was late again, and my mother sighed like the weight of the world lived in her chest. I said what I had been swallowing for months. I said he was using my paycheck to cover his gambling, and that I was tired of lying to creditors when they called. The room froze. My mother stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. He laughed once, sharp and ugly, then told me to watch my mouth. I didn't back down. I explained the withdrawals, the cash advances, the promises that never turned into rent. I said I could prove it. That was when he stood up and pointed at the door. He didn't scream. He didn't throw anything. He said it calmly, like a rule everyone already knew. If you think you're so grown, you can be grown somewhere else. My mother didn't stop him. She folded her napkin, eyes on the table, and said maybe it would be good for me to learn responsibility. I remember nodding, not because I agreed, but because something inside me went numb. I packed a backpack with clothes, my school laptop, and the envelope where I kept my savings from working nights at a grocery store. When I stepped onto the porch, the air felt lighter and crueler at the same time. I waited for my mother to call me back. She didn't. The first weeks were a blur of couches and borrowed space. Friends, parents asked polite questions and avoided my eyes. I learned how quickly gratitude can turn into inconvenience. I finished high school early by taking extra credits, then picked up a second job bussing tables. I slept in a room the size of a closet and told myself it was temporary. What hurt more than the exhaustion was the silence. No calls, no texts. On my birthday, I checked my phone until the battery died. I told myself the truth was expensive, and this was the price. Years pass the way they do when you're busy surviving. I moved cities, then states. I learned skills that paid rent and kept my fridge full. I paid bills on time. I built a life that didn't wobble when someone else made a bad choice. I didn't talk about my family much. When people asked, I said we were distant. It sounded kinder than abandoned. Every so often, a relative would message me with a vague, miss you note, but nothing changed. I stopped expecting apologies. I stopped needing them. Then one winter morning, my phone rang with a number I hadn't saved but knew by heart. I let it go to voicemail. Another call followed. Then a text. We need to talk. It's important. The words pressed on old bruises. I didn't respond until evening and only with a question. What's wrong? The reply came fast. Your mom is sick. We're struggling. We could really use your help. There it was, the shape of the truth bending again. Not an apology, not a question about my life, a request. I drove back for the first time in years on a gray afternoon, rehearsing boundaries like a script. The house looked smaller. The paint peeled where I remembered it fresh. My stepfather hugged me like we were old friends. My mother cried and said she always knew I'd do well. At the kitchen table, the same one, they explained the debts, the late notices, the way things had gotten out of control. He said he'd changed. She said family forgives. Then they asked if I could stay a while, help them get back on their feet just until things stabilized. I listened. I noticed what they didn't say. They didn't say they were wrong. They didn't say they were sorry. They didn't say they believed me back then. They said they needed me now. I felt 17 again for a second, backpack on my shoulders, truth buzzing in my throat. Then I felt older, steadier. I told them I could help in limited ways with clear terms. I would not move in. I would not cover debts I didn't create. I could help them make a plan, nothing more. The room cooled. My stepfather's smile thinned. My mother asked why I was being difficult. I realized the truth hadn't changed. Only the direction of need had. I left that night to a quiet hotel and slept deeply. In the morning, my phone filled with messages accusing me of holding grudges, of forgetting family. I spent the next few days replaying old scenes with new clarity. At 17, I thought being kicked out meant I was wrong. At 27, I saw it as a warning label. Still, I tried to help the way I said I would. I sent my mother a simple budget spreadsheet and links to free counseling resources. I offered to sit with them for an afternoon to prioritize bills. The responses were polite at first, then prickly. My stepfather didn't like being told what to cut. My mother didn't like seeing numbers without excuses attached. When I suggested selling the extra car, he accused me of punishing him. When I suggested he attend a meeting, he said I was judging. The pattern was familiar. Truth was welcome only when it didn't cost them comfort. They started calling at odd hours. Not emergencies, just pressure disguised as concern. Your mom is stressed. You know how she gets. You're the only one who can help. I remembered how that language worked. It turned boundaries into betrayals. I answered less. I stopped explaining. I kept my help concrete and limited. When the calls turned sharp, I ended them. When the texts grew dramatic, I waited. The distance steadied me. A month later, my mother asked if I could co-sign a loan. I said no. She cried. She said she never thought I'd abandon her like this. The word abandon landed hard, heavy with history. I reminded her that she watched me leave with a backpack. Silence stretched. Then she said, "You always were stubborn." It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough to a confession to tell me nothing had shifted. I returned one last time to hand-deliver a folder with resources and a clear plan. I laid it out calmly. Here S what I can do. Here S what I won't. I will not give you money. I will not lie for you. I will not pretend the past didn't happen. If you want a relationship, it starts with honesty. My stepfather laughed and said I was being dramatic again. My mother asked why I couldn't just help like a normal daughter. I stood up, heart pounding, and said because helping without truth is just enabling. I left before the old urge to fix everything could grab me by the ankles. The begging came later, after consequences arrived without my buffer. Utilities shut off notices. A court date, they said, was a misunderstanding. A panicked voicemail asking me to come back home, just for a bit, just until they sorted things out. The words were almost the same as years earlier, but now I heard the subtext clearly. Come absorb the fallout. Come be the adult we won't be. I didn't go. Instead, I focused on my own life with a quiet determination that surprised me. I took a class I'd been putting off. I moved apartments. I made friends who didn't confuse support with sacrifice. When guilt bubbled up, I let it pass like weather. I wrote the truth down so I wouldn't forget it on softer days. I wasn't refusing to help because I was angry. I was refusing because I had learned the cost of pretending. Then, unexpectedly, my mother called with a different tone. No urgency, no ask. She said she had been thinking about that night at the kitchen table, about how I tried to show them proof. She said she was scared back then and chose comfort over courage. She didn't say sorry outright, but she said she believed me now. The line crackled with static, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I told her I appreciated hearing that. I didn't promise anything else. We began talking occasionally, cautiously. My stepfather stayed out of it. I kept my boundaries firm. Over time, the begging faded. They found other solutions, imperfect and late. It wasn't my redemption arc. It was theirs, partial and uneven. And that was fine. The truth about being kicked out at 17 is that it didn't ruin me. It clarified me. It taught me that honesty has a shelf life with people who benefit from silence. It taught me that family isn't who you bleed for until you're empty. It's who learns to stand when you stop holding them up. Years later, when they asked me to return, I finally understood the power of saying no without anger. I didn't go back to save them. I stayed where I was, building a life that didn't require permission. People like to imagine endings as clean reconciliations or permanent cutoffs, but real life settles somewhere messier and quieter. After that conversation with my mother, nothing magically fixed itself. We didn't become close. We didn't rehash every wound. What changed was smaller and heavier. The phone stopped ringing with panic. The requests stopped being demands. When she called, it was to tell me about her day, not to hand me a problem. When I visited, it was for an afternoon, not an open-ended stay. I paid for my coffee, hugged her goodbye, and left without feeling like I owed something I couldn't name. My stepfather and I never repaired things, and I stopped waiting for that to hurt less. Some relationships don't heal. They simply stop bleeding when you stop reopening them. I learned to accept that closure doesn't always look like an apology. Sometimes it looks like distance that no longer aches. What surprised me most was how my own memories changed. The night I was kicked out used to feel like proof that I was unlovable or difficult. With time, it rewrote itself. I saw a teenager who refused to lie, who chose honesty even when it cost her shelter. That version of me deserved more credit than I ever gave her. I started carrying that truth forward. When a boss asked me to cover up a mistake, I declined. When a friend treated my time like a convenience, I spoke up. Each choice felt like a quiet thank you to the kid with the backpack. Years later, I ran into a former neighbor who remembered the drama. She said, "I heard you left and did really well. Your mom must be proud." I smiled and said, "I'm proud." It felt radical to say it out loud. Pride without permission. Pride that didn't require a witness. Occasionally, my mother still hints. She says things like, "You could always come home if you wanted." I tell her my home is where my life fits me. She nods, a little sad, a little relieved. I think part of her understands now that asking me back would mean asking me to be smaller. And she knows I won't. If there's a lesson in being kicked out for telling the truth, it's this. People will ask you to return when they miss what you provided, not when they understand what they took. You don't have to go back to prove anything. You don't have to harden your heart to protect it. You can choose a third option that feels like betrayal only to those who benefited from your silence. You can choose yourself without turning anyone into a villain. I still believe in honesty. I just believe in it paired with boundaries. I believe in compassion that doesn't erase consequences. I believe that family can be loved from a distance, and that distance can be an act of care. The truth didn't cost me my family forever. It cost me an illusion, and that trade was worth it. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine that kitchen table again. The buzzing light, the moment before everything changed. If I could speak to that 17-year-old, I wouldn't warn her to keep quiet. I'd tell her this. Say it anyway. Walk out if you have to. There is a future where you don't have to beg to be believed. There is a life where telling the truth doesn't get you kicked out. And even if they beg you to return, you don't have to go back to survive.